Now, earlier this afternoon, the leader of UKIP, Nigel Farage, gave the keynote speech at his party's conference in Birmingham. In a moment, I'll be speaking to Mr Farage, but first, here he is giving his response to speculation about a future deal between UKIP and another political party.
We, having spent nearly 20 years of hard work, sacrifice and much mockery, building UKIP into a political brand in this country that is now connecting with millions of ordinary men and women out there, I have my absolute assurance that I am not going to sell this party short for any political gain. Absolutely no way on earth that I would do that. The only way we would even consider a negotiation of any kind at all would be if first an absolute promise was made to give this country a full, free and fair referendum so that we could decide whether we remain members of the EU or not.
Well, we can speak to Nigel Farage, as if by magic, from the UKIP conference now. Nigel, welcome to the programme. You probably heard yourself there just a few seconds ago.
I did, yes.
You are considering it, though. If those conditions were met, if there was that deal signed in blood to give a referendum, you'd go for it?
Let's just be clear what's happening here. What is happening is the Eurosceptics in the Tory party are screaming at David Cameron. They're saying, look, the Lib Dems are going to go off to Labour. UKIP are at 10% of the polls. You must do a deal with UKIP. It's them calling for a deal. I haven't called for a deal. What I have said is that I will not do a deal that compromises the party for short-term political gain. But if something was on the table that meant we could more easily walk through a door marked independence, we'd be crazy not to consider it. But we couldn't even negotiate anything until we absolutely knew that this country was going to get a full, free and fair referendum on our EU membership. What
conversations are you having with members of the Tory party along those sorts of lines?
We are not having any conversations formally with the Tory party whatsoever. Right. What we are doing is having lots of conversations with patriotic Eurosceptics in the Conservative Party at all levels who are finding it very difficult to survive under David Cameron's leadership. They still, many of them, hope and believe that David Cameron will do the right thing and will respond to this treaty that Mr Barroso tells us we have to have by giving us an in-out referendum. And I would say this, that if Cameron does not deliver an in-out referendum, then I think what you'll see are many more Eurosceptics from the Conservative Party coming across and joining UKIP.
OK, so you're saying the Tories are running scared at the moment, or some of them in terms of the polling that you've got, and also that some of them are looking at you as a Eurosceptic alternative. But is that partly the problem with your party? Is that still how you are characterised, only as a Eurosceptic alternative to the Conservatives?
Well, I think that's unfair for two reasons. Firstly, people underestimate, particularly in the Midlands and the North, just how many old Labour votes UKIP takes, and these messages appeal to the left and right of the political spectrum. But secondly, I think if you look at the opinion polls, you know, the UKIP share of the vote in terms of intention to vote in a general election, if it was held tomorrow, have trebled in the last 2 years, and that is because we are actually beginning to connect with people, not just on the question of who governs Britain, but how that Britain should be governed. And people know what we're saying increasingly on wind farms, education and law and order. OK, so you're going for a broad-based appeal, but on that basis, then a deal makes perfect sense. I mean, if you can extract that pledge, whatever it would look like, I'm not sure what you'd want them to do in order to keep to that cast-iron guarantee, because then you would get some seats at Westminster. Well, that may well happen, but for the moment, I have to tell you, my focus is on the Police and Crime Commissioner elections in November, the Corby by-election, the County Council elections next year. You know, this party is upbeat, it's in the most positive mood it's ever been. We are pushing forwards. One thing I do know, though, the most likely way that this country will get the right referendum is if UKIP becomes stronger. Right.
I mean, you say, or I think people in the party have said, that UKIP can win the European elections in 2014. How realistic is that?
Well, we weren't given a hope by anybody in '99, and we established a toehold when three of us got elected. In 2004, we came third beating the Lib Dems. In 2009, we came second, beating the governing Labour Party of the day. The winners in 2009 were David Cameron's Conservatives, and they won because they promised they would give a referendum. They have broken that pledge, and I think now that Mr Barroso is using the F word as liberally as he is, and we can all see that the European Union is turning into a state, I think we've got every chance.
Let's just clear it up. F, obviously, for federalist, I presume, Nigel Farage. Now, what percent...
He does. No, let me confirm that.
Yes. What percentage of the vote, though, are you aiming for? Because that's the key. What percentage of the vote are you aiming for in 2014?
Well, I mean, to win those Euro elections, probably 27% of the vote would win.
27%. OK, so that's your hope and aspiration. I mean, as it stands now...
It's not a... It's...
No, sorry, go on. What were you going to say?
No, I'm going to say, you know, this is not some pipe dream. You know, we have been proved to be right on this European question, right about the Eurozone, right about the cost of British industry, right about the harm that green taxes would do to this country. We've been right, and people out there know that. OK,
what about the logo? Heard talk about you might be in favour of dumping the pound sign logo. Is that true?
Well, I think the pound sign logo has been fantastic for our party. It showed everybody exactly what we stood for. It served us incredibly well. However, there are lots of voters out there under the age of 40 who are unaware there was ever really a threat to the pound. And if we could find something that was a sort of forward-looking symbol, then perhaps we should move to that. But
Any
I promise
ideas?
all UKIP voters, well, listen, I make one promise. We're not going to do what the Post Office did with consignia and get rid of something that has worked very well for rubbish. If we find something better, we'll go for it.
All right. Nigel Farage, thank you very much. How big a threat do you think UKIP is, just in terms of worrying the Conservatives?
Oh, quite a big threat. I mean, he's on a roll, isn't he, Nigel Farage? And you can understand why. I mean, I think there are an awful lot of malcontents, not only outside the Conservative hierarchy, but within it, who would have every sympathy with that. And of course, the EU referendum, his big thing is now sort of common currency as a talking point, not only for the Conservatives, but also for Labour, and might indeed appear in both the main parties' manifestos. It's conceivable. I mean, where I think Nigel Farage, and I also think he might do really, really well in the European elections. Quite true that they trounced Labour in 2009. Right. Where I think he's mistaken is that there's a deal to be cut. Why would Cameron engage in such a Faustian pact when, if he wants to shift to the right, which, you know, traditionally hasn't served the Conservatives very well, there's plenty of oomph from within his own party to take him there.
Well, and isn't that what it is? It's all talk. I mean, it's great publicity for Nigel Farage and UKIP to talk of Conservatives running scared and all the rest of it. But one could argue that still the most likely way of getting some sort of referendum, you know, in that sense, would be, you know, through the Conservatives, not through UKIP.
Well, of course. I mean, UKIP, they're a bit like a kind of bad reality show. You think it's never going to come back, and it still comes back in every election. There they are yet again. And, you know, the polls do show that, I think one of the last polls showed that UKIP were doing better than the Lib Dems. But they're a dividing party when it comes to, I think, domestic politics. They've never had a member of Parliament in Westminster. I don't think they ever will, to be honest. But they will certainly dilute the Conservative vote. And as Mary said, you know, they're looking for an absolute agreement from Cameron to say, yes, we're going to have a referendum. That's never going to happen in a month of Sundays. There's more chance of, there's more chance, I think, of David Cameron getting elected at the next election.
Well, I mean, the thing is, though, electorally, as we get closer to 2015, I mean, you know, depending on what happens to the polls, there is, Mary, isn't there, a real sort of risk for the Conservatives if the Liberal Democrats still haven't built any more support and UKIP is into double figures. They've got to look at the numbers and think, what are we going to do the next election if we were going to have any chance of having a coalition or winning?
I think that's completely true, Jo, and I don't know how you resolve that one, because, of course, we're going to see at the Lib Dem conference the view that, you know, the Tories have somehow contaminated the Lib Dem brand. But the same is true the other way round. I mean, a lot of people in the Conservative Party have been so uneasy about coalition. So how you hold the coalition together on one hand and on the other hand make yourself a coherent and electable Conservative government of the future is, I think, a very difficult trick.
Well,